trade war breaks out. On April 2, President Donald Trump dealt a shocking blow to the global economy when announcing strong reciprocal tariffs, pushing many countries into a confrontational position. Europe, Britain, South Korea, and a series of major economies immediately reacted violently, warning of serious consequences. Will this move bring the U.S. into a full-blown trade war, or is this a strategic move to reshape world trade according to Mr. Trump's wishes? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinion in the comments below so we can better understand your perspective on this issue. Immediately after President Trump announced new reciprocal tariffs, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen could not hide her dissatisfaction. She called this a serious mistake, emphasizing that this move not only weakens US-EU trade relations, but could also cause great harm to both economies. For the EU, Washington's decision is no different from a declaration of economic war, forcing the bloc to consider tough responses. Not letting the situation be pushed into a passive position, the EU immediately discussed a series of response measures to put pressure on the Trump administration. U.S. products under target include wine, beef, and soybeans, key agricultural products exported to Europe. Not stopping there, Brussels also considered imposing tariffs on Boeing aircraft and U.S. cars, directly targeting large U.S. industries. Notably, giant technology corporations such as Google, Amazon, and Microsoft may become the next targets, with tighter regulations or special taxes on digital services. These measures, if implemented, would not only increase the price of imported goods in Europe, but could also disrupt global supply chains. EU businesses, especially manufacturers that depend on components from the US, will face great pressure. According to 2023 data, the EU has a goods trade surplus with the US of up to 156.6 billion euros, but a deficit of 108.6 billion euros in the services sector. If tensions continue to escalate, this imbalance could create unpredictable fluctuations in the global economy. Not only European Union, EU, after the US announced new tariffs, Swiss President Karin Keller-Sutter confirmed that the government was aware of the situation and would respond appropriately. Although she did not take an overly tough stance, she emphasized that Switzerland will protect its economic interests, especially in the context of trade relations with the US, which are very important. The Economy Minister Guy Parmelin quickly added a series of facts showing that Switzerland is not a small partner. He emphasized that the country is the sixth largest foreign investor in the United States, with Swiss businesses employing about 400,000 American workers. These are not just simple jobs, but also positions with high salaries and good quality, contributing significantly to the U.S. economy. However, if the new tax rate negatively affects business activities, Switzerland may have to reconsider its investment strategy. The trade relationship between the two countries also has sensitive points. Switzerland is heavily dependent on the U.S. market in the pharmaceutical, financial, and high-tech sectors. For these industries, any trade barrier can cause major disruptions. Instead of reacting strongly immediately, the Swiss government is considering the possibility of dialogue, seeking to convince Washington of bilateral interests to protect its economy without raising tensions too high. The British side also responded immediately. British Prime Minister David Cameron quickly spoke out after the new tariff announcement from Washington. He called for a moderate approach, stressing that Britain would not react hastily but would instead continue negotiations with the US. According to him, a trade war only brings damage to both sides, and Britain's goal is always to protect free trade, avoiding tit-for-tat tariffs that could damage the global economy. However, in the context of many countries preparing countermeasures, the question is whether this soft strategy will help Britain protect its economic interests. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Rachel Reeves is actively working with the EU Economic Commissioner to find a common solution. Not only concerned about the impact of tariffs on domestic businesses, the British government also faces pressure from large corporations demanding a clear direction. Reeves emphasized the importance of reaching an agreement to reduce the impact of new tariffs, avoiding putting additional pressure on British businesses in a context where the economy has just recovered from many uncertainties. But with a tough stance from the US side, will the negotiations bring the expected results? To increase bargaining opportunities, the UK is considering adjusting digital services tax policy. Currently, the government is imposing a 2% tax on large technology companies such as Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, a move that once made Washington unhappy. The new proposal is to reduce or adjust this tax rate in exchange for the U.S. reviewing its tariff policy on goods imported from the UK. But if the U.S. does not give in, will London continue to maintain a moderate stance or be forced to apply stronger measures? As trade tensions escalate, decisions over the next few weeks will shape the future of economic relations between the UK and the US. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni quickly expressed concern about the US decision to impose new taxes. She warned that the tariffs could deal a severe blow to Italian exports, especially in key industries such as industrial production and automobiles. With an economy that is already facing many challenges, Italy cannot stand idly by at the risk of being harmed by Washington's trade policies. The question now is, how will Italy react to protect its interests without pushing trade relations with the US into confrontation? The Confindustria Employers Federation, which represents Italy's largest businesses, also expressed deep concern. According to them, the new tariffs will cause Italian goods to lose their competitive advantage in the U.S. market, while also putting more pressure on the economy, which is struggling to recover. Exporting businesses from precision engineering to high-end consumer products could suffer serious losses. Without response measures, Italy risks losing a large part of this important market. Faced with escalating tensions, the Italian government is considering coordinating with the European Union to come up with an appropriate response. On one hand, they want to protect domestic businesses from the negative impacts of tax policies from the US. On the other hand, Italy also needs to consider to avoid making the situation worse. Will Rome choose the path of negotiation or participate in a full-blown trade war with the EU? Developments in the near future will determine the future of trade relations between Italy and the US, as well as the EU's strength in responding to pressure from Washington. Immediately after the US announced the new tariffs, the Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy immediately held an emergency meeting on April 3rd. Top officials and economic experts sat down to assess the impact of this tariff policy on the Korean economy. Not only a trade issue, this is also a problem of long-term diplomatic and strategic relations with the US, Seoul's most important partner. The 25% tariff that Washington plans to apply will hit Korea's key exports, especially cars and electronic components. Big names like Hyundai, Kia, or chip manufacturers like Samsung and SK Hynix could suffer significant losses if their goods become more expensive in the US market. With the global technology supply chain still not completely stable, a shock from tariffs could have far-reaching consequences. Faced with this situation, the Korean government is considering many response options. One of the preferred solutions is to seek dialogue with the US to reduce tariffs or reach a more beneficial bilateral trade agreement. South Korea could emphasize its role in America's high-tech supply chain, while offering concessions that could help ease tensions. The question is whether Seoul can protect its economic interests without fraying its relationship with Washington. The upcoming steps will determine Korea's position in the trade war that is heating up day by day. The French government, along with the European Union, reacted quickly after the US announced new tariffs. According to information from Euronews television network, the EU did not hesitate to affirm that it is ready to apply retaliatory measures if the situation does not improve. This is not only a warning but also a clear sign that the EU will not stand still in the face of the threat of tariffs. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also criticized the US move, saying it would lead to rising consumer prices in the EU, damaging people's purchasing power and creating additional administrative burdens for businesses. EU companies may face increased costs due to import taxes, while many businesses will also have difficulty complying with new administrative regulations. The biggest concern of France and other EU countries is that these tariffs not only directly affect industry, but could also erode the trade relationship they have built with the US over the years. This forces the EU to carefully calculate its next steps, because it is not only an economic issue, but also a major confrontation between trading powers. When the new tariffs are applied, US companies will face higher import costs, which will put great pressure on domestic product prices. Increasing tariffs on goods imported from other countries not only increases the cost of products, but can also result in consumers paying more for basic consumer goods. This creates a wave of price increases, which can directly affect the purchasing power of Americans. What is more worrying is the possibility that inflation could increase as American businesses will tend to pass these increased costs on to consumers. Commodity prices will escalate, and consumers will clearly feel the impact of this. When the cost of living increases, people may cut back on spending, leading to a decline in consumer demand. However, the impact does not stop at consumers. The U.S. economy is at risk of facing recession if high taxes reduce the incentive to consume and invest. As consumers become more frugal and businesses cut back on investment due to rising costs, the economy could stagnate. Some industries, especially those that depend on imported components, will be severely affected, causing production disruptions and weakening the competitiveness of these companies. As countries simultaneously react with retaliatory measures, the risk of trade war becomes clearer than ever. If major countries continue to impose tariffs and trade restrictions, the global supply chain could be seriously disrupted. This will lead to stagnation in international trade, reducing the flow of goods and services, negatively affecting the global economy. The consequences not only stop at businesses and the economy, but also spread to the financial market. Investors will face instability as trade tensions threaten the stability of major economies. Pressure on the stock market could increase, causing shares of large export companies, those directly affected by tariffs, to fall. This will create a wave of concern among investors and could cause global financial markets to fluctuate strongly. Amid rising tensions, the future of international trade stands at a critical crossroads. The tariffs announced by President Trump are not only a challenge for many nations, but also a test of the global community's ability to maintain stability in an increasingly volatile world. Will countries choose the path of dialogue or respond with forceful retaliation? As global trade tensions escalate, every development has the potential to reshape the world's economic landscape. Stay with us for the latest updates and in-depth analysis of this unfolding situation.